Hey guys, Candice Malcolm here with the True North Initiative. We're live. There is a lot that I want to cover today. Let me just go live here on Twitter. We're live. Candice Malcolm here with the True North Initiative. There is a lot that I want to cover today. There's just a lot going on in the news. Originally, I was going to make this video about the UN Compact on Migration. I've been having a lot of requests for people to who've asked for me to write about this, asked for videos on it. I have that in the works and I'm going to be releasing that later this week. But today I just wanted to jump on to talk about a bunch of issues that are in the news right now. I'm going to wait a few minutes here for a few more people to jump on before we get into the issues at hand. It's been a crazy week, starting with the news out of Oshawa, news of GM pulling its operations out of Oshawa, as well as a bunch of other plants in the US, Michigan, Ohio, and I think Maryland. And sort of fallout from that, there's this sort of conversation emerging about, well, who is to blame and what exactly can be done to keep these kind of operations going. These are sort of the the grounds of having a solid workforce in the country, working people, hardworking people day in, day out, going to these sort of blue collar jobs and having them ripped out from under you. It's tough. It's been going on for years now. We're seeing the numbers dwindling and dwindling, and then to get the news that it's just, completely over, that we're shutting it down. Someone's pointing out that, yeah, there's a big protest out in Calgary today. So you guys all saw the big protest against Justin Trudeau, who was in Calgary last week. I don't think he had quite the welcome that he wanted. Well, the protests are ongoing. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the double standard that we see from the federal government. There's a couple double standards. There's a double standard in the media when it comes to how they talk about conservatives versus how they talk about liberals. And then there's also a double standard from the Trudeau government themselves and how they react and deal with job losses when they happen in central Canada and in Ontario and in Quebec versus job losses that happen out west and in the oil patch, which don't seem to get the same kind of reaction. All right, let's get going here. So GM has slashed its Canadian operations despite taking at least $13.7 billion from Canadian taxpayers over the last decade. I want to talk about the migrant caravan, which surged to the US border. And of course, the mainstream media in the US continue to just lie about it and mislead the public about what's going on down there. Twitter is cracking down on conservatives. There's yet another purge. Conservatives have lost their account. Not just conservatives, but people who are on the left but dare to talk about some of the issues that conservatives talk about are also being purged. And finally, Canada is becoming the new global capital for birth tourism. So we're going to get into that. We'll cover all that and more in today's True North update. So thanks so much for tuning in. I want to start by talking about the issue that I was talking about a little bit off the top, which is GM. So GM announced that the company is slashing approximately 15% of its workforce in North America. It's closing 5 facilities. So we've got Ohio, Michigan, Maryland, and Ontario are all seeing their assembly line plants shut down. That will happen in January 2019. This is pretty devastating news for the community, all the communities, those ones in the US and certainly in Canada, with Oshawa being a suburb sort of outside of Toronto, but it's its own community. And GM has really been the heart. GM's Canada operations are based there. My understanding is there's about 10,000 workers that work at that headquarters, and then about 2,500 of them are assembly line workers, union workers. Those are the ones that are going to be losing their jobs. It's incredibly sad, getting that news just right before Christmas, hearing that your livelihood is gone just like that. It's not easy for these folks to transition. You've been working in an assembly line your entire life, and all of a sudden, it's not like you can go find another assembly line or another car manufacturing plant to go work at. This just doesn't really exist that way, and so it's tough news. And certainly, we all feel for people who are in that situation. In the same way as a topic I've been talking about for months, if not years, is the ongoing recession that we're seeing in Alberta and the oil sands. It's tough for folks out in Alberta as well. So, there's a couple of things, a couple of themes emerging when we're talking about the Oshawa plant closure, why it happened, what we can do about it. A lot of sort of finger pointing and blame is being talked about. Well, let's talk about the actual rationale. So GM itself came out and basically said the reason that this is happening is because they're moving to a greener strategies. They're reimagining their entire manufacturing of cars, and they want to focus more on environmentalism. So they're going to be creating more green cars, electric cars, and self-driving cars. Okay, so this is exactly what the environmentalists and the left have long been demanding, right? They've initiated a war on car. They hate cars. They don't want you driving your car. They want you out of your car. And so, it's to be expected. They first demonized the oil, they demonized the oil sands, and they've been demonizing the car. So this is just the companies who are reacting to that decades-long demonization of the car. Now we're at a point where there are actually feasible electric cars. They're on the market. They're not cheap, and they're not very good. The quality isn't very good. But still, this is a consequence of that sort of, again, demonization of the cars. You can't expect to demonize cars, to demonize oil, to say that there's something wrong with our lifestyle, and then still expect companies to sit and produce these cars and create these good middle-class jobs. And there's always this tension that exists on the left, certainly in Canada, you see it in the NDP, where you have the two kind of factions of the left. You have the union-based, the working blue-collar people who care about workers' rights, and they want these kind of good-paying manufacturing jobs. And on the other hand, you have this sort of what we call the limousine liberals or the champagne socialists, the eco warriors, the feminists, the far left urban elites who really loathe and hate that other side. And you certainly saw that in the last election and down in the US with Trump. A lot of those blue collar workers left the Democrat Party. They felt abandoned. They felt like they're, that they were no longer part of the coalition. They were pushed out by this sort of identity politics crowd, and they were welcomed in the Republican Party, and they rallied around Trump. And then, those are the people that are really demonized in the media by elites. It used to be the core base of the left, the Democrat Party, the NDP Party, and increasingly they're leaving. So you can see why there's this tension. So I certainly, when we're talking about this issue, when we're talking about why this plant closed, one of the major things we have to talk about is this environmental movement that is just absolutely waging war against our lifestyle. And that includes sort of staple of middle-class lifestyle in North America, which is the automobile, the car, and people owning cars. Well, we're not going to produce them anymore. They don't want you driving them. They're trying to make it so expensive for you to own a car that you can't, and moving to this whole electric, self-driving kind of stuff. I'm not necessarily opposed to electric cars. It might be good for the long run. I think that possibly having self-driving cars could be good, reducing congestion, making cars safer. I've read a lot of studies on this stuff, and a lot of the traffic, a lot of congestion in cities comes from just bad driving and human error. And so self-driving cars could help speed that up, make your commute to work productive time because you're not driving. But of course, at the same time, it displaces thousands of workers, possibly millions of workers, people who drive for a living, people who, truck drivers, taxi drivers, Uber drivers, all these types of drivers would be out of work. So that's a different conversation for a different day. But definitely let's talk about environmentalism. The second thing that I would point to when it comes to GM closure is the fact that these companies, GM specifically, has been a massive recipient of government handouts, government bailouts, corporate welfare. I mean, the idea that yesterday and today there are people on the left and people in the media who are criticizing capitalism and blaming capitalism and free markets and saying, this is what happens when you have free market capitalism. It just shows an utter ignorance of, first of all, what it is what free market capitalism is. The difference between crony capitalism or corporatism and free markets. So, when it comes to GM, we know that they were huge recipients of the big government bailout that was orchestrated by the Stephen Harper conservatives back in 2009. I was incredibly critical of this move. I thought it was absolutely idiotic for the government to be bailing out losers. That's not how markets work, right? The whole idea of free market capitalism is that there are prices, they send out signals. So when you have the government manipulating the actual bottom line and bailing out companies that have failed, you're just creating more failure. You're prolonging the failure. You're not allowing that company to correct and to try to create a product that people might want. Instead, you're rewarding their bad behavior and you're continuing it. And that's essentially what it does. It creates a bubble. Eventually that bubble is going to burst, and we've seen it over and over and over again. So there was a CBC study that I found that showed that it's hard to track exactly how much money the Canadian government has given to GM over the years. But there was, let me see if I can find it here. This CBC report had the number close to $14 billion over the years. It wasn't just the Harper government as well. Every year there's, in the budget every year, both federally and in Ontario provincially, there's these automobile innovation funds that the government just continues to throw good money after bad, hundreds of millions of dollars at these companies to prolong production, but they don't care. They don't have any loyalty. They don't have any skin in the game. The Auditor General came out with a report saying that there was very little oversight over these loans and where the money is actually going. And because they don't have any skin in the game, at any point, they're a company, it's a free society. They can just decide to pull the rug out from under you. And that's, again, why it's just a terrible idea for governments to be getting involved in the private sector, choosing winners and losers, and using our money, again, to make these kinds of decisions. So we saw it with GM right now. Despite $13.7 billion from the Canadian taxpayers, they feel no loyalty and they're pulling out of Canada. The same thing happened with Bombardier. Let me pull up these numbers. So in just this year, so in February 2018, the government announced that it was giving out a new loan to Bombardier, $372.5 million loan package that was announced in February for Bombardier's C-Series and Global 7000 aircraft program. And then lo and behold, in November, so just this month, 2018, November 8th, Bombardier announced that it was cutting 5,000 jobs. So, why is the government taking $300 million out of the economy, taxing people, and then giving it to a company that relies on that kind of funding, and then that company turns around and pulls the rug out and cuts 5,000 jobs? This is just why you don't do business with corporations. It's corporatism, it's not capitalism. And you have another example just right now. The Ford government Ontario, the Conservative government Ontario, announced it was giving $62 million to Maple Leaf Foods. Maple Leaf Foods is moving its operations, and it is basically closing down it's creating a new plant in London and closing down 2 others. And the result is a net loss of 300 jobs. So again, Canadian, Ontario taxpayers, there's both grants coming from both Trudeau and Ford, giving these guys millions of dollars, $62 million to lose 300 jobs. Aaron Woodrick over at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation has been tweeting about this. So the idea is, why do we have corporations receiving these handouts? Why does the government choose some and not others? Companies that get rewarded and get these handouts are always the ones that, have the high profile, people know who they are, they make for good photo ops and make the politician look good that they're, getting involved and, helping create jobs. It's such a myth that the government creates jobs, right? These companies are creating jobs, and they're taking loans from the government. They're manipulating their relationships. If governments truly wanted to create an environment for job growth, they should do it across the board. They should do it across the board instead of targeted handouts, targeted loans, or special deals with companies. Just do across the board, make the environment friendly to businesses, and that's the role for the government. The role for the government isn't just to jump in and to do these ridiculous corporate bailouts. So again, it's not capitalism, it's corporate welfare. And then other people are saying that this is just a free market decision and that it had nothing to do with Trudeau, nothing to do with Ford in Ontario, that this is just a free market decision and there's nothing that could be done. That's obviously not true either. The reality is that, again, the business climate is set by the government. So when you have endless red tape and regulations, when you have high taxes, when you have looming carbon taxes that are going to be increasing every year, when you have an ideological government like the one run by Justin Trudeau that's committed to all kinds of ridiculous UN government schemes and endless threat of future taxes and future regulations, you have a government that's piling on debt at completely unsustainable rates, driving up interest rates. You just have this overall picture that's not great. The increasing income taxes as well. So, you have to imagine, why would you want to set up a business in Canada right now? If you're working out in Alberta and you're in the oil patch, you have something like Bill C-69, a ridiculous review process that's going to rely on identity politics and intersectionality when determining whether or not a pipeline can be approved. It's basically the end of pipelines. It's basically the end of this kind of infrastructure in Canada. And you look at this environment, I don't know how you can say that the government has no fault whatsoever in businesses leaving town. And then, you also have the unions, which are driving up the cost of labor and making it so it's just not affordable, that companies can't make a living in Canada just given the basic economics. And, I don't have a lot of time for someone like Jerry Diaz, who's the head of the Unifor union, and now all of a sudden, he's out there being the champion of the people, saying that we're going to do anything we can to stop GM from closing its Oshawa camp. Well, maybe Jerry Diaz, if you hadn't spent the last 2-3 weeks creating a political campaign and running against Conservatives, and you had actually been looking out for your workers and getting ahead of this, you could have negotiated and tried to stop this before it happened. I had so many people over the last few weeks reach out to me, people who are part of Unifor, people who are part of that union, talking about their frustration with the leadership within their union, that they are frustrated that their union dues are going to idiotic political campaigns like Jerry Diaz's idiotic The Resistance, fighting a resistance against an opposition party in Canada, and yet the core role of the union is supposed to be looking out for workers, making sure that they have the benefits and the jobs and the healthcare, that kind of stuff. That's where the money should be going when you pay union dues. Instead, they're going to ridiculous leftist causes, and there's no transparency and there's no accountability. So I don't have a lot of time for people like that. Another one I mentioned off the top is that there's just a total disparity and a gap between how the media and specifically the Trudeau government treats job losses in different parts of the country. You saw him instantly comment and jump to send his thoughts and talk about how he's doing whatever he can to help these workers in Oshawa have lost their job. Well, that's all well and good, but where has that sentiment been towards Alberta, towards Alberta's recession that's been ongoing? I mean, it's an absolute crisis out west. Every time I go to Alberta, I hear more and more people talking about the just total lack of respect that they feel in Canada. More and more people, both on Facebook, on social media, and when I go to Alberta in person, talking about how they're just sick of Canada, frankly. They're sick of being part of a confederation that doesn't appreciate what they've contributed. You still have equalization payments, so money is flowing out of Alberta to the rest of the country. And at the same time, there's record high unemployment rate. The oil prices, crude oil, is the lowest it's been in generations. And you never hear Trudeau sending out his thoughts or jumping to send condolences or say he's going to work as hard as he can to help workers in Alberta who are out of work. So what's with that double standard? I don't understand how Trudeau can just so brazenly ignore the suffering and the job losses that are happening in Western Canada, and then jump in to be the hero when it comes to these job losses in Ontario. And then, of course, speaking of double standards, my colleague at True North, Andrew Lawton, pointed this out, and it's pretty ridiculous. So this is two news stories that were back to back on a news website. And, it's just, let me see if I can find it here. It just goes to show the way that the media talk about conservatives versus the way that the media talk about liberals. So here it is. There's two stories back to back. I don't know if you guys can see that. But the first story is about Premier Ford, Doug Ford, in Ontario. It says Ford under fire for pushing for extra EI benefits, GM workers instead of fighting for jobs. And then juxtapose that to the next headline, Trudeau vows to help the GM workers back on their feet as auto workers stand firm on closures. So, when it comes to Ford, the headline, the focus of the story is all about how he's under fire. And why? I mean, he's actually trying to do something helpful. He's trying to ensure that the workers who've been laid off get extra EI payments. I don't know if you guys know about the EI program, but it's such a scam. Every region, so it doesn't treat all Canadians the same. We all pay into it equally, but it doesn't treat all Canadians the same. The amount that you receive is based on the unemployment level in your region, in your city. And so it's relative to other people. So in some parts of the country, you collect for a long time and the payments you receive are a lot more. Other parts of the country, it's a lot lower. So it doesn't depend on your industry or how long you've been working or how much you've been paying into. It's based on the unemployment levels. It's such a scam. So anyway, Doug Ford is trying to advocate for people, but the headline is that he's under fire. Whereas Trudeau is doing nothing, as far as I can tell, other than issuing more platitudes about how his thoughts are with the workers. And his headline is totally positive and rosy. Trudeau vows to help GM workers. So welcome to the world of Canadian media and bias. It's that kind of subtle bias that just drives conservatives crazy. Every time I read a news story in the mainstream media, I see it playing out, regardless of the topic, whether it is talking about illegal immigration and refusing to call it illegal immigration, or whether it's glowy praise for people like Justin Trudeau, and then just disparaging comments and sort of looking down their nose when it comes to any conservatives. But that's my thoughts on the GM bailout. Let me know what you think, if you agree, what you think can be done, why you think this happened, if there's anything you think I'm missing or there's something you think I'm wrong about. Let me know in the comments. But got lots more, so let's move on. I think, speaking of media bias, I wanted to talk about the invasion, the surge of illegal immigration is happening on the U.S. border. There's a massive caravan of people that have been walking across Mexico. They come from Honduras and Guatemala mostly. And, this thing has been a long time coming. It was super politicized during the midterm election in the U.S. There's been lots of reports out about who's been organizing and coordinating this caravan, migrant caravan. And, the whole thing is just very suspect. I'll just leave it at that. I think that it was sort of, the timing is suspect. The people who were there were suspect. Anyway, the migrant caravans finally reached the U.S. border. It's interesting because they came up through Mexico. It would have been a lot faster for them to just go into Texas, but they didn't. They went over towards California, towards Tijuana, possibly because they want to get into California. They want to get the benefits of California, possibly because they just want more attention, more coverage in the media, and they know that they'd get that in California near a major city. as opposed to through some back channel in Texas where there's not a lot going on. So yesterday there was footage of basically a surge. A large group of these migrants attempted to just rush the border. They couldn't get past the wall. The wall actually did its job. In California, most of the border is protected by a wall, but they decided to surge in through an official port. So they tried to go in through where cars are usually coming across. Most of them were stopped. Most of them didn't get in, but there was this sort of chaotic scene. It was almost like a war zone. I mean, it could be described as a war zone where there was a surge happening, there's confusion, and there's a lot of footage of these people throwing rocks and just sort of throwing whatever they can across at border agents. The response was that the border agents protected themselves. They shot tear gas at some of the men that were throwing the rocks. And unfortunately, there were some women and children that got caught up in it. And so, of course, the mainstream media, latches onto that story, that narrative. There's a picture on basically a bunch of newspapers yesterday and today showing a mother with children, bare feet, and wearing diapers and stuff, fleeing away from these U.S. border agents. And the reaction in the media and by Democrats has just been so outrageous. Saying that these are possible war crimes that were committed and that they were gassing civilians. I just want to say a couple things. First off, we now know that the whole media narrative, again, about these people being bona fide refugees and asylum seekers isn't exactly true. We know that the majority of the people who are in this caravan are young men. They're economic migrants and not refugees. And, the fact that there were some mothers with their children that were there is just really sad. It's just really sad. I don't know why you would put your family in that kind of situation. I can't fathom why any mother would decide to bring her young children into that scenario, especially when there's men and they're throwing rocks and they're engaging with officials. That's an act of violence on an international border. It's just a really bad idea to bring children into that mix. So I don't know why more of the blame isn't being placed on the parents who would decide to put their children in that situation. Again, it was their personal decision. And second of all, there's been a whole bunch of reports now debunking this media narrative, because apparently the Obama administration used to also use tear gas in these situations. A report came out that found that basically the Obama administration was doing this constantly, on average of about once a month, and the media was completely silent about it. There is no outrage, there's no reports, there's no Democrats calling it war crimes, of course. And then, it happens once under Trump, and lo and behold, he's a monster. So, that's again the kind of media bias and the outright lies that just turn people away from watching the mainstream media and being able to relate to the Democrat Party. Let's move on. There's a crazy story. I was shocked to see this one. Everyone knows that these social media platforms are completely biased, that they have a major problem when it comes to enforcement, that they haven't set out rules that are consistent, that are followed. People constantly get censored, they get suspended, they get their page shut down, they get demonetized, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, everything. It's been going on for years. And there's kind of a theory that a lot of people have that, there are a lot of bad actors on the far right, on the right, and we probably shouldn't want to associate with them anyway. So when they get in trouble, there isn't a huge surge of conservatives saying, hey, wait a minute, what about free speech? What about, our ability to, just whatever, communicate? That's what the whole point of these social media sites are, is free speech and to allow people to communicate. But, you don't really want to jump up and support someone whose opinions you might find vile or who you don't like their tactics. And so there was this one conservative writer who had this theory, it's like a slippery slope, that, the media goes after someone like Milo Yiannopoulos, and you might say, oh, well, I don't really like Milo, I don't agree with him, and, he's gone too far, and he does some things I don't like, so I don't want to defend him. And then a couple months later, they go after Alex Jones, and you're like, well, Alex Jones is a lunatic, and he's a conspiracy theorist, so, I'm not going to jump in and defend him. And then all of a sudden, the media companies are going after people more and more and more and more mainstream. And I think this is now happening. So a guy named Jesse Kelly, who is a radio talk show host, he's a columnist, he's a retired combat Marine. He ran twice for the GOP, for the Republicans, for a congressional seat in Arizona. He's just like a mainstream normal conservative, and his Twitter account got shut down over the weekend. It was just sort of disappeared. He's speaking out about it now because he didn't have any warnings. He has no idea why. There was no indication as like what rule he had broken or why he was shut down. And he had a huge following. And I think this has sort of woken up a lot of conservatives down in the US about, the sort of arbitrary power that Twitter and these companies have to just completely take away your audience. You spend a lot of time producing content and building things up on social media, basically do it for free. You're giving these platforms free content by constantly putting stuff on Twitter, putting stuff on Facebook. And then, in turn, they turn around and you don't, your entire following is gone. And then that's what's happened. So I think it just shows that, these companies have an issue when it comes to accountability, when it comes to, just exactly what their rules are, how they're structured. These companies as well, they're not structured in the same way as like a media company. They're not supposed to have editorial opinions. They're not supposed to, be able to pick and choose who can say what on their platform, but increasingly they're doing that. So I think it's a major problem that we have to deal with. And, a lot of people are just saying enough is enough with Twitter, time to move off that platform and go somewhere else. But the reality is, where else are you going to go? You can go to Facebook, but Facebook has similar compliance issues. You can start your own blog, but then you're not really reaching the same amount of people in the same way. So I think that it's interesting when it comes to just Twitter in and of itself, because the whole idea was that you're having a conversation. It was a microblog. You're sharing ideas and exchanging ideas. And then increasingly, they're creating all these barriers and rules around what you can and cannot talk about. So I think that's a major concern. I haven't seen many stories of Canadian conservatives getting kicked off of Twitter. I think probably because Canadians just aren't really on the radar in the same way as these high-profile American accounts are. But it doesn't mean we're not, safe from that threat. And so finally, I want to talk about the a new report that came out in the Toronto Star this week about birth tourism. And you might recall this issue came into the news earlier this year because at the Conservative Convention, they voted to remove birthright citizenship, and it created a huge controversy. The Liberals and the left in Canada kind of had a moral panic, and they did the whole pearl clutching routine that they tend to do over these issues, pretending that the Conservatives had kind of just invented an issue and it was no big deal. They pointed to a Statistics Canada report that found that there was only a couple of hundred babies that were born to illegal immigrants each year. And Stats Canada report said that only about 312 babies are born in Canada to mothers whose place of residence is officially listed outside Canada. Well, a new study just completely destroys that narrative. The Institute for Research on Public Policy put out a paper, and it was published in Policy Options, that suggests that about 22% of children born in Richmond Hospital are born to non-resident mothers. So it's more than double the percent of any other hospital in Canada, but really 1 in 5. So we're talking about one single hospital in Richmond, BC, and the report found that 1 in 5 mothers, 1 in 5 babies that was born in this hospital was basically a baby that was born through birth tourism. So the concept, for those not familiar, is that wealthy women mostly from China, from Nigeria, from Russia, from Europe, decide that they want their children to have dual citizenship. They want their child to be a citizen of both their country and of Canada. And they choose Canada because Canada just has absolutely no structure to protect against this. It's like the most naive country. There's so many other countries who have dealt with this issue in the past. They've changed their laws to outright ban this. And Canada is sort of the lone country that's just naive and optimistic and thinks that, you know, anyone who wants to be Canadian is going to be a great Canadian. And so what do we have? We have nothing. We have nothing to stop this. And so these women come to Canada late in their pregnancy. They hide the fact that they're pregnant. They conceal it to the border guard and just lie and say that they're coming to Canada to visit a friend or whatever. Sometimes they go to these birthing homes and they live there right up until they go into labor. Then they go into a Canadian hospital. A lot of times they don't speak English. They can't really communicate properly with the doctors. A lot of times the doctors are the ones that are complaining and blowing a whistle about this because they find it unsafe. They don't know anything about a woman's medical background or history. It's hard to plan how many doctors and how many nurses to have on staff in a given day when you have, you know, 1 in 5 people coming into your hospital who are just tourists to Canada showing up to give birth. And then basically the baby's born, it gets its Canadian passport, and the couple leaves, or the mother leaves, the baby leaves, and they don't come back to Canada, except for the fact that the baby is automatically a citizen, so they automatically get access to all of the benefits and handouts that Canadians receive. And so you basically get free Canadian citizenship without having any kind of relationship with Canada. And then, you know, you can use that forever in the future. You can use that for future healthcare. If the baby ends up having some kind of serious illness, then, you know, baby can move to Canada, the family can move to Canada, and the baby will get free healthcare or free education. You can go, you know, no matter what, you know, you can end up going to a Canadian university and paying domestic student prices instead of international. And the students know there's a huge disparity between the price that Canadians pay to go to Canadian universities and the price that foreign students would pay. And then, of course, they can sponsor in their parents and other family members to become Canadian once they're 18. So this is a huge backdoor. It is a scam. The fact that it's 22% or 1 in 5 happening at just this one hospital. And then this study also found that the overall numbers had basically skyrocketed. So this is from a study. The data shows the number of births to non-resident mothers, including all provinces but Quebec, which refused to release the data, skyrocketed to 3,628 last year, from just 1,354 in 2010. So the numbers basically tripled in the last decade, in the last 8 years. And yet, you know, when the Conservatives wanted to talk about this issue, when the Conservatives brought it up, the membership did, the leadership didn't. But when the Conservative members wanted to talk about birth tourism and how to stop it, there's basically the reaction from the left and from the media was, oh, this is, you know, the Conservatives are lying. They're creating a problem that doesn't exist. They're just trying to create fear when it comes to immigrants, and, you know, there's nothing to see here, basically. Well, we now know that that's not true, that this is a real problem, that it needs to be addressed, and that, you know, we can continue to stick our head in the sand and ignore the issue all we want, but that doesn't make the problem go away. So I'm glad to see that that study was put out. The report actually came through the Toronto Star, which you wouldn't really expect them to be covering this issue. But again, you know, there are serious threats and problems, not just in the fact that there's a group of people who are taking advantage of Canadian citizenship, which devalues the citizenship for all of us. And, you know, if anyone can just walk into Canada and automatically get citizenship for their child, despite never paying taxes, never living in Canada, having no commitment to Canada, no connection to our culture, to our values, to our language, that child gets to grow up in a foreign country, but then gets all the privileges of being Canadian. I mean, it just isn't fair. It just isn't fair. But it's not just that. It's also, again, a safety concern, because a lot of times there can be complications with pregnancies, things can go wrong. And if the doctor doesn't know anything about you or your medical history, or doesn't even speak your language, and you're in a hospital about to have birth, I mean, it creates a major potential problem. And that's exactly why you have doctors blowing the whistle about this, saying like, hey, what's up with all these people coming in and giving birth who, you know, we have no idea who they are and we can't communicate with them. I think that this could be there could be a pretty easy way to stop this. Stop giving citizenship automatically to people who are not legally in Canada. So if you are a legal resident, if you have a visa, if you have permanent residency, and if you are a citizen and you have a child in Canada, then yes, your child is a Canadian citizen. But if you're here on a tourist visa, or you're here illegally, if you're not in Canada legally, then your child should not get to be a Canadian citizen. They should not be granted Canadian citizenship. That's basically the standard rule across Europe, in the UK, in Australia. It's basically Canada and the US that have the policy that anyone born in our territories automatically gets to be a citizen. And I don't think that that's really right in today's day and age. And you have Trump in the US who's now talking about issuing an executive order to get rid of the exact same thing, the exact same phenomenon. It's basically getting rid of the incentive to come to Canada or the US illegally just to have a kid, which isn't really fair to all the people who come legally, who follow the rules, who work hard and sometimes expensive to get, the visa, make sure you have everything filled out properly, working with an immigration lawyer or whatnot. When you go through that whole process to become a legal resident or a legal citizen, and then you turn around and you see someone else from your country who didn't bother doing any of that, who just came into the country illegally, gave birth, it's just not fair. It's a total double standard, and it's not fair. So I'm going to leave it at that today, guys. I'll be on the radio with Brian Lilly in Ottawa in about half an hour. We'll be talking about illegal immigration and the border chaos, both on the US border and on the Canadian border. So make sure to tune in. I'll post a link on my Twitter and my Facebook so you can listen live. And thanks so much for tuning in. Have a great day.